Hi, everybody. Happy Monday. We are having a cozy day in this house because it's 11 degrees out. Hi, Scout. What would you like? Scout would like some attention. Okay, so today we are going to be doing Psalm 15. We're using alabaster, and the art for this one is very interesting. And once we read through the psalm, it might make a little bit more sense. So, okay, Psalm 15. This one's a banger. It's short and sweet, but it's good. Psalm of David. Who may worship in your sanctuary, Lord? Who may enter your presence on your holy hill? Those who lead blameless lives and do what's right, speaking the truth from sincere hearts. Those who refuse to gossip or harm their neighbors or speak evil of their friends. Those who despise flagrant sinners and honor the faithful followers of the Lord and keep their promises even when it hurts. Those who lend money without charging interest and who cannot be bribed to lie about the innocent. Such people will stand firm forever. Okay, so the line that's sticking out to me this morning is this first verse. Who may worship in your sanctuary, Lord? Who may enter your presence on your holy hill? So I think in a lot of ways, or I feel in a lot of ways, that these are the questions that we are negotiating in our spiritual life all the time based on this idea of like accepting and rejecting. And so I think what we accept about ourselves, what we accept about other people, and what we accept about God is usually mirror imaging what we reject about ourselves, what we reject about other people, and what we reject about God. And so there's this idea of stages as far as like not hierarchical stages, but more like stages that you move into and integrate. Especially if you've done any work with spiral dynamics, you'll be a little bit familiar with this. Or any kind of like polarity work is this idea of stages is really important. And so I think people who have had very clear stages in their spiritual life can kind of will probably notice what I'm talking about when I'm saying these things. So first stage, as far as consciousness goes, around what we accept and what we reject. So usually there's like a base level of our consciousness about who we understand ourselves to be, who we understand other people to be, and who we understand God to be. And generally that's kind of surfacey, right? It can be, I don't want to say vapid, but it's shallow. You haven't kind of gone through much yet with yourself or with others or with your spiritual life with God, alongside God. And so what you can accept is actually usually a pretty small window, especially like what you can accept for contradictions, what you can accept for nuance, what you can accept for challenge or struggle or suffering is usually pretty slim. So that's usually, when you encounter somebody who either newly joined a spiritual tradition or is just starting to do some work in their growth with themselves, that window is usually pretty small. It's like pretty shallow. Those waters are pretty shallow. And generally, let's say when someone's talking about God in that space, it's usually that kind of magic honeymoon sunshiny feeling where it's because it is such a relief to kind of fall into something that's supporting you and you're so grateful. And so it tends to be a little bit shiny, but also the thinking tends to be a little bit black and white. And so in that area, you kind of tend to accept very little and you reject quite a bit, because what you're rejecting is anything that is intolerable to you. And then as you grow and mature, and that can be spiritually, psychologically, or emotionally, this would be second stage consciousness that you'd be moving into, or you'd be kind of moving up the ladder a little bit, where you are noticing that there's some contradictions, like there's some evidence that's popping up that you can't really hold just such a singular belief about something anymore. And so your ideas about God may change. This is where you find a lot of people who were really passionate about their faith or their spiritual tradition or their yoga practice or whatever it was. And then they find out about somebody that let them down, somebody that was abusive, or, they can't quite fit in that really tight container anymore. And so they're asking to like be stretched and pushed open, and like their spirituality inside that container is or psychically, emotionally, whatever's happening, is kind of being pushed up against those walls. And so this is a time where a lot of people either deconstruct their faith or walk away from church or walk away from traditions, because it was this thing that they thought it was, and then it turns out not to be that. And that is the same thing with marriages, with relationships, friendships, all, and this is also a really important time where people struggle with parenting, as the relationship tends to require more nuance as kids get older. People are not able to hold the emotional needle threading that needs to happen. They're still stuck in that, like, well, I'm telling you it needs to be this way, so you need to do it this way. And so that's kind of a second stage consciousness place where people kind of can get a little bit stuck there, because it's full of grief. And if you aren't able to integrate and move through that grief, you get you can get trapped there, because it can be cynical, nihilism. A lot of people who like feel like they get red pilled, they get stuck in second stage like that, where it's not shiny happy, and they're really struggling with the nuance. And so, but they can't integrate it into that next level where they're able to draw the darkness and the light into each other in order to create a fuller, richer experience, which brings us to third stage. So when they're talking about here, who may worship in your sanctuary, Lord, who may enter your presence on the holy hill, as you are moving up and forward and into this deeper idea of what is acceptable inside a spiritual life, you'll kind of keep moving up. And so the relationship gets more honest, right? And so if in that first stage, it's very like happy-go-lucky, again, honeymoon. Second stage, it can be a little bit intense. And a lot of people put it down there because they thought that it was going to be this place where all their wishes were just fulfilled. And then when it isn't that, they either drop out, or if you're lucky, you get broken open into this third stage, which is the place I like to play the most with people, is to like, how do you take the reality of what's going on for you spiritually and use it to like blast you open intimately with God, with other people, with yourself. And this is really challenging because it requires an insane amount of honesty that most people are not really prepared to do, because you will have to look at the entire chessboard of your life and your decisions and your history and the way that you accept and reject other people and yourself and God in this space. And so this is the playground. This is fun, is up here when you're asking people to take the beauty of the world and the beauty and the richness available, including the beauty inside really intense darkness, and you work it inside the grief that's happening and the longings and the desires and the potential wrath and rage and envy when there was things that you wanted that didn't happen, or ways that you were hoping to be loved that it, and that's not what happened to you, or whatever it is that usually starts on a spiritual level, but people sometimes enter there through a relational level. So this is when people are trying to change and they can't get past that second stage despair. And so you have to be able to grab onto what you're rejecting about reality to reclaim the life force energy that's kind of living outside of you in areas where you've divorced yourself from it in order to live in a very clear-cut way. And I want to just normalize that everybody does this. This is how we survive. We live in a very complex world. And so this is how you develop spiritual maturity, is that you start out, what is it St. Paul says? He starts milk fed and moves to meat fed. This is how this looks like. And so, you start out with things being really black and white when you're a kid, especially, early adolescence, you hear them use a lot of black and white language. And then there's like that late adolescent, early adulthood kind of nihilistic, I know better than you kind of thing. And then there's that beautiful adult stage of spirituality, which includes a lot of nuance. And so you can hear people's ability for nuance will give you a great data point on their spiritual maturity, because it's not that they're going to have different opinions. Their opinions might stay the same, but the way that they hold it is very different. You can tell if somebody's done some integrative work around the things that they've rejected versus the things that they've rejected by how they can talk about it, right? Because it's kind of, they can hold it out here. They can look at it, they can talk about it, and they don't get that charge of where they need to defend, or because it's not attached to their identity anymore. So part of this work is feeling all your feelings around something and allowing yourself to be truly dark, devastated, despair, whatever that looks like. So then you can bring it back around into the light. And that's, that space where you cry so hard you start laughing, kind of like that, where you have to kind of like go around all the way through and grind it out and realize, what am I rejecting about myself? What am I rejecting about other people? What am I rejecting about God? Where am I not allowing God to be fully available for me? And that's usually places in the body. You can find it usually where you feel a lot of compression. It's usually things that you've rejected, moments that you rejected, feelings that you rejected, experiences you rejected. A big one that people reject is certain areas of their sexuality, a lot of longings and desires. But also like dreams, anything that like felt like it was maybe too much. It's really easy to compress that down, where you were like, maybe a child or a young adult, and you really wanted something from an experience and it didn't happen, and you kind of just swallow that down and you push it down, and that creates a density in the body. A great way for, and this is going to sound very woo-woo, and so it's totally fine if it's not your bag, but part of something that I've really enjoyed working with is tuning forks. And I know it's all vibes, it's all vibration, but if you're working with tuning forks, you can see where you start with a very low frequency and then you raise it higher and higher. And so you can see in your body where there's areas of real intense density. And you can do that in your spiritual life as well, because it will show up in your body, and you can find those things, but also you can figure out how you actually feel about things. And if you're like going into prayer and you're like, oh, I'm so grateful, but you don't actually feel grateful, that's a part of you that's been rejected. So I'm just, if you move up the ladder, as you climb up the ladder, what you reject becomes smaller and what you can accept is more. And that's why people are able to hold a little bit more nuance. So as my teacher, Christina, said right before we climb in the sweat lodge, is everything's allowed. So I just want to encourage you to open up the playing field with yourself, with your relationship with yourself, with your relationship with others, and with your relationship with God, to allow everything. And that includes the darkest stuff you can possibly imagine. Again, it doesn't mean you have to act on it. It doesn't mean you have to do anything about it. Just be willing to see it. And then you can just start engaging it just a little bit. And all that energy that you have, all that beautiful, like Eros style life force energy that's been kind of caught up in these little areas that you reject, there's nothing too dark that you can't bring to God and shine that heavenly light right inside it. Again, doesn't mean you have to do anything with it. You just allow it to be, and you'll be less reactive with yourself and with other people. So that's all I have today. This is a really long one. You can tell I'm on break from school because I'm not panicking about time. So have a beautiful Monday. Mwah.